There was a time when royal weddings were entirely private affairs, polite rituals to which television cameras and journalists had no access. However, history books recount many fascinating anecdotes about these ceremonies, which, in most cases, had little to do with love. Most royal couples met for the first time at their wedding, after which they spent their wedding night together. As one might imagine, some of these weddings ended in the worst possible way. With that in mind, we have compiled a list of some of the most disastrous royal wedding nights in history. We begin with the wedding night of Catherine the Great and Peter I of Russia. The marriage of Catherine the Great to Peter was a magnificent event. The bride, who came from Germany to marry the unlikable Russian heir, captivated everyone present with her beauty, elegance, and adaptability to Russian life. Empress Elizabeth of Russia placed great hopes in her, as she had little faith in her nephew, whom she considered lazy, a drunkard, a hunting enthusiast, and thoughtless. Catherine's disappointment became evident during her wedding night, when she waited for hours for her new husband to appear. Eventually, Peter arrived drunk, lay down beside her, and fell asleep. The nights that followed were equally dreadful. At the age of 18, Peter seemed indifferent to his wife's beauty and preferred playing with small wooden soldiers, miniature cannons, and fortress models. During the day, these toys were hidden under the bed. But after dinner, when the couple retired, the bedroom door was closed, and the fun began. When lying next to Catherine, Peter's eyes lit up with excitement for his games, which sometimes lasted late into the night. Henry VI was the King of Castile and the brother of Isabella of Castile, the queen who unified the Kingdom of Spain with Ferdinand of Aragon. King Henry was kind and gentle but suffered from serious health issues. He had a form of acromegaly, also known as gigantism. His hands and feet were disproportionately large, his head was abnormally big with coarse features, and he was enormous in stature. In short, he was a lovable yet intimidating giant, plagued by physical ailments, and only content when away from the public eye. Throughout his life, he had little contact with his half-siblings. At the age of 15, Henry was married to Blanche of Navarre. They remained together for 13 years without producing an heir, and their marriage was annulled. Shortly after the first marriage ended, a second was arranged for Henry with another Iberian princess, Joanna of Portugal. Joanna was 16 years old and strikingly beautiful. Like other European princesses, she was merely a pawn to seal an alliance with her brother, King Alfonso V. Interestingly, before their wedding, the king abolished the law that made the wedding night a public spectacle, perhaps anticipating what might happen. Reports suggest that the couple's first night did not go well. Despite attempts at artificial insemination, the results were deemed ineffective. A German doctor who traveled to Castile to perform the procedure noted that Joanna was unable to conceive. Despite the failure, this was the first recorded attempt at human artificial insemination in history. Henry's troubles earned him a cruel nickname that became a metaphor for his kingdom. He was known as the Impotent, and his wedding night with Joanna was an absolute horror. The British royal family has long been a breeding ground for unhappy marriages. Charles I is associated with 56 illegitimate children. Edward VI was a frequent visitor to brothels, and everyone remembers the marriage of Charles and Diana. Yet another union failed spectacularly on the wedding night, that of Caroline of Brunswick and King George IV, then the Prince of Wales. George stubbornly resisted finding a wife, and only agreed when Parliament offered to settle his debts, which stemmed from a life marked by laudanum addiction and prostitution. Courtiers advised him to marry his cousin, Caroline of Brunswick, who lived in her parents' principality in the provinces. He had only seen her face in family portraits. The couple met a few days before the wedding, and the impression could not have been worse. George retreated to the other end of the palace to recover with a glass of cognac, while Caroline remarked that her future husband was fatter and less handsome than his portraits. The wedding took place on April 8, 1795. George admitted to his witnesses that he was marrying against his will. Chroniclers reported that he fainted twice during the ceremony and stared at one of his mistresses, who wept when the archbishop asked if anyone objected to the marriage. The marriage was consummated, but the wedding night was dreadful. The drunken groom spent the night warming himself by the fireplace while the bride waited for him in bed, and nothing happened. Contemporary newspapers noted that there were only 3 physical encounters between the couple, one of which led to the birth of Princess Charlotte Augusta. Afterward, George declared he would never sleep with his wife again, not even to produce another heir. For many years, sex was one of the greatest taboos in Western society, leading to numerous embarrassing and traumatic situations, such as that of Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony on her wedding night with the Spanish King Ferdinand VI. Ferdinand VI married Maria Josepha Amalia, a girl not yet 16 years old, in his third marriage in 1819. After her mother's death, the girl was raised in a convent and had no knowledge of intimate relationships. The monarch, on the other hand, was known for his passionate nature and was obsessed with producing a male heir to secure the monarchy's continuation. It was customary for a blood princess, already married and familiar with the king, to spend a quarter of an hour with the bride before the wedding night to explain what would happen next. However, when the time came, the king's sister-in-law, Maria Teresa di Braganza, refused to undertake this task, as she was the sister of Isabella di Braganza, Ferdinand's previous wife. In her absence, the eldest bridesmaid was supposed to take on the role, but she also refused, claiming she had never noticed what her husband did with her in bed. It was left to the king to decide what would happen that night. The king entered the chambers of a terrified 16-year-old girl. Upon seeing him old, overweight, and likely quite imposing, she tried to flee. Communication was impossible since she spoke no Spanish, and he spoke no German. Furious, Ferdinand VI summoned his sister-in-law and the eldest bridesmaid to immediately instruct the bride. After a brief conversation between the two women and the young girl, the king returned to his chamber, prepared to consummate the marriage without resistance. However, Maria Josepha Amalia's fear was so great that she could not endure the encounter, and in her distress, she lost control of her bodily functions. The enraged king cleaned himself as best he could, and avoided his wife for days. Interestingly, the queen died 10 years later, childless, despite several attempts. The first wedding night on this list is that of King Henry VIII and his fourth wife, Anne of Cleves. After the death of his third wife, Jane Seymour, in 1537, Henry VIII remained single for over 2 years. The search for a new queen began in 1538. With this new marriage, Henry sought a source of distraction and excitement. His wife was expected to entertain him so well that he could behave like a gentleman. The king tasked his envoys with finding the ideal woman. At the time, the English king did not have a particularly good reputation as a husband. Due to alliances, the choice fell on Anne of Cleves, the sister of the Duke of Cleves, an elector of the Holy Roman Empire. On December 11, 1539, the young woman arrived at the port of Calais, set to marry a man she had never met. Their first meeting was unpleasant for both, and Henry VIII made it clear that he disliked his bride, saying she looked nothing like the portrait sent to him. The wedding took place on January 6, 1540. She was only 23 years old, while the king was 25 years her senior. Before the ceremony, the king tried every means to rid himself of his bride, but failed. Unsurprisingly, the wedding night was uncomfortable. From the king's perspective, their encounter was a complete failure. They tried night after night, but the king was unable to consummate the marriage, and Anne remained as virginal as she was born. Henry blamed his lack of desire on his new wife's appearance, particularly her sagging breasts. We must not forget that the problem was not Anne of Cleves, nor her appearance, but Henry's desire to be rid of her without taking the blame and, of course, without revealing his impotence. In the end, Henry reached an agreement with Anne, and the marriage was annulled. Anne lived well after the annulment and outlived Henry V. The marriage of Henry VI and Margaret of Valois was doomed to fail. He was a Protestant, and she was a Catholic princess in a time when France was divided between these two religious factions. Margaret of Valois, a French princess and daughter of Catherine de' Medici and Henry II, married King Henry of Navarre on August 18, 1572. This occurred during the foggiest days of the Reformation amid religious wars. Many on both sides were firmly opposed to this marriage. Dynastic marriages at the time were often the result of peace negotiations and agreements between allies. However, Catherine de' Medici used the marriage to drive Protestants from French soil. On the night of August 23 to 24, 1572, numerous Catholics were sent to eliminate the Protestants who remained in the area due to the public ceremony. By the end of the massacre, around 3,000 people had been killed. Today, this is known as one of the worst massacres in French history, the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. The events of the massacre took place days after the wedding night. It was believed that the marriage had not been consummated and could be declared invalid. To prevent her husband's death, Margaret told her mother that the marriage had been consummated. After their honeymoon was interrupted by the massacre, the couple met only a few times. Henry became a prisoner, and Margaret was used as a political pawn. Later, Henry managed to escape and return to Navarre. The couple never had a complete union in discord. He was unfaithful to her, and she to him. Years passed without heirs until the marriage was annulled. Isabella II of Spain ascended the Spanish throne in 1833 as a child. Her reign was controversial, filled with coups and extramarital affairs. Early on, the court sought a suitor for her, but the queen repeatedly obstructed their efforts. The chosen groom was ultimately the Duke of Cadiz, Francisco Diaz de Borbón, a cousin of the queen. He was a man who avoided politics, and this union satisfied all Spanish factions. Nevertheless, the queen was unsettled by the arrangement. Upon learning that Francisco would be her future husband, she wept and pleaded with her mother, even saying, "No, not with Paquita." Francisco Diaz was a highly effeminate man, suspected of being homosexual, which earned him the nickname Paquita at the Spanish court. The wedding took place on October 10, 1846. At the time, she was 16, and Francisco was 24. It is said that the day before the wedding, Isabella told her mother, Maria Cristina, "This is something I accept as a queen, but not as a woman. I did not want this man to be my husband. They forced him on me, and I don't want him." As one might imagine, the wedding night was an absolute disaster. She even told her closest friends, "What could I expect from a man who wore more lace than I did on our wedding night?" Initially, the two despised each other, but over time, they managed to build a friendly relationship. Over the years, the husband became an advisor and friend to Isabella II of Spain. Their friendship was close, and they met to discuss their lovers. On one side was a queen with a voracious appetite for romance, and on the other, a homosexual man, King Louis XIII of France and the Spanish Infanta Anne of Austria, an unhappy marriage marked by accusations and mistrust. Their wedding took place on November 21, 1615, when both were only 15 years old. The marriage was arranged by Maria de' Medici, the Queen Mother of France and regent for Louis XIII. Maria de' Medici's regency was disastrous for France. Her relationship with her son was terrible, as she constantly sidelined him and sought to consolidate all power for herself. To secure an alliance with Spain, she arranged for her children to marry the children of the Spanish king. Anne of Austria, the daughter of King Philip III of Spain, was chosen for Louis XIII. For Louis, this was yet another humiliation, as he viewed Anne as a mere Spaniard and thus an enemy. At the time, Louis was not in control of the situation, and the marriage proceeded. At 15, Louis was not ready to assume such responsibility. The young ruler was fragile, immature, extremely shy, and still in puberty. The wedding night took place only because his mother forced him into it. He was escorted by Maria de' Medici and placed in the marital bed. 2 hours later, Louis returned to his room and showed his personal physician his flushed face, claiming he had consummated the marriage twice. It is difficult to say whether he lied or failed. Nothing happened that night, and the couple did not sleep together again for another 4 years. The final entry on this list is the dreadful wedding night of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. Marie Antoinette was the daughter of Maria Theresa of Austria, while the future Louis XV was the Dauphin of France and grandson of Louis XV. Their marriage was a political arrangement between the long feuding dynasties of France and Austria. At the time, a rapprochement occurred, and their marriage was a symbol of this. To make the wedding possible, Marie Antoinette was retrained in her manners and aesthetics, adapting her sense of beauty and upbringing to French standards. Louis was a shy and reserved young man who thought only of hunting and working with clocks. His grandfather wanted his bride to be as beautiful as possible, fostering a desire for women that his grandson did not exhibit. The wedding took place in April 1770 in a Viennese church, clearly a political arrangement, as it was conducted by proxy. At the altar, Maximilian, the bride's brother, played the role of the Dauphin. After the ceremony, a procession of 57 carriages traveled to France. On French soil, the young woman met the 60-year-old King Louis XV before meeting her groom, Louis Auguste, who had little contact with women and was almost certainly still a virgin. He gave Marie Antoinette only a brief kiss on the cheek. A new wedding ceremony took place in Versailles, a suburb of Paris where the French court resided. Under the watchful eyes of the nobility, the couple went to bed. Everyone wanted the Dauphin to produce an heir quickly, but this wedding night went down in history for a particular reason. Nothing happened. The Dauphin wrote in his diary the next morning, nothing. Louis did not consummate the marriage with Marie Antoinette, and this situation persisted for 7 years. Meanwhile, Marie Antoinette faced pressure from all sides, but had nothing to reproach herself for. It is believed that the young Dauphin suffered from phimosis, causing him intense pain whenever he attempted to consummate the marriage, leading him to give up. Only after a visit to a doctor was he able to perform the act and produce an heir.